All right, folks. So we're going to start this next video, which I want to explain these larger patterns and the archetypal energies, the kinds of, again, those bundles within the human experience, and which ones are associated with these different planets, and how those are unfolding and coming to a real nexus or inflection point right now. And to do that, I'm also going to describe these cycles. So as you, in the last video, I said that the cycles and movements are powerful and are part of that understanding of the snapshot and the moment. So I'm gonna, standing here in this position, which is the center of our wheel, of our little planetarium, and I'm going to go over here to Pluto. So the energy of Pluto is the one that has the longest cycle of the various kinds of archetypes that we have studied long enough to understand it. And the energy of Pluto and all of these that I'm going to explain, as I mentioned before, they're complex. And it's hard to reduce and contain into something just, a few words and phrases. So hopefully the things that I say will evoke some kind of deeper understanding. And one of the things that is helpful to us in understanding Pluto is right now, here I am in this Minnesota woods in the fall, and so all of the activity of life has come to a close for the trees in specific, and many of them have already lost their leaves. They have done their work and they've lost their leaves, and now the leaves are on the ground and they are going to compost and rot into the ground, and they're going to bring that essence and fertility into the land. And the trees have dropped seeds, and those things are going to come together, and out of that seed is going to come new life. And so on that very simple basis, it is that cycle of death, rebirth. And so this energy can also be seen as regeneration. And when the old forms are worn out, the leaves did their job and now they're done. And so when old forms are worn out, this energy tends to break them down and bring them back into a cycle so life can continue. And one of the essential pieces to understand is, first of all, this is a huge, complex, and impersonal energy. Pluto takes 248 years to go all the way around the circle, all the way around the zodiac and its different expressions.
Solar system.
In the solar system. To revolve around the sun, yes. So, and so it's slow moving, and even though it's present all the time. So if we look at it in the individual, the essence of Pluto or of regeneration is going on, that our cells are constantly going through death, rebirth. They're going through a regenerative process until the body can't maintain that form anymore and the whole body dies. But it's going on all of the time. And what is key is that the essence survives through the forms. The essence also goes through transformation and change as the forms do, as the overall experience does. And so I mentioned a little bit of what happens in the individual, and in the personality, Pluto energy has to do with the idea of maintaining one's central essence as things in life change. So it tends to be this will towards mastery and having some power and agency over our life. On the more collective level, Pluto has to do with how things are empowered. And it tends to be how the collective power is utilized. And so one of the things that has happened, and I'm going to use the United States as the example, is that the United States, when the people of the colonies said that they are no longer feeling empowered by the king and the parliament in Britain. The king is no longer there. They don't feel that anymore. And so that system of monarchy and control, there was a revolution that we're going to break from that. We're going to break free from that. And 248 years ago, the Pluto was in an area of our zodiac which represents how hierarchies are constructed, the ways that we build our reality, and how institutions hold those together, i.e. governments and other kinds of institutions. So the people said, we're not feeling empowered by this, so we're going to break from it. And so that system of a monarchy, essentially, was broken down. Now, Pluto has returned. It's done that 248-year cycle, so it's returned to that same place when the United States was going, hey, there's something, we're not feeling empowered, and we want something different. And so systems have been breaking down. Hierarchies and structures have been breaking down where they were weak, where they no longer served their purpose. Like the leaf has done its job, it's tired, and it's late. So these things were happening, especially in the last 15 years, 15 to 20 years. And it was accelerated in the last few years. So I'm going to talk about that. So Pluto was in the position when we started the revolution. Then we had the war, and then Pluto moved into a position that has to do with into Aquarius, which has to do with empowering a democracy. Again, I'm being selective, but where people are more equally empowered, and where there is more individual freedom. So Pluto is right on that inflection point or cusp between the breakdown of old structures, old forms, old institutions that aren't serving, and moving into a place where we can choose to have more equality and empowerment amongst people. We can empower democracy. And for the moment, I'm going to leave it there. That's what's happening. This is right at that point where it is going to shift. So while it is still in the sign of Capricorn, it does mean that the form world of institutions are still going down through that last breakdown. That's important. And very shortly, it's going to move into a different kind of energy. Now, what I want to do then is I'm going to pick up the symbol for another one of these archetypes. So Pluto has just returned to where it was when the United States had its revolution and broke free of the king. Now along came in the 1890s and 1900s Neptune, which moves a little faster, 165 years. It came by, and when it aligned with Pluto, these energies are combined and a new cycle begins. This particular cycle is 500 years because it's the combined energy of these two archetypes. And again, to oversimplify a little bit, but Neptune has to do with, in the individual, it's about our imagination, it's about what we dream, it's about what we envision. None of it is solid. It's what is coming out of all of the possibilities from our spirit. And collectively, it has a lot to do with on its highest vibration or frequency, it's universal love and compassion. It's the sense of unity, because it's this common place of a unified spirit. And in its expression, it can be visions or imagination that aren't connected to reality. And so it could be deception, it could be escapism, it could be creating something that looks real but isn't. But, so those are the contrasts. It can be deception and escapism, some things that are not real, but have a feeling and an influence at some deep level and connect to the collective unconscious, that place from which all of these realities can arise, and what we choose to envision or dream about. So that happened in the 1890s and the early 1900s. And Neptune has moved along, and it has reached a point around the circle that is 1/6 of the circle. So this is a point that, in terms of when I talked about relationships between these archetypal energies, is that our sense of being together and what we might envision, or alternatively, what illusory stories we might be telling ourselves. But it has now reached this place. And how these things work together is that the things that were set in motion and at that time in the 1890s, without going into a lot of detail, but some of the things that were empowered were a stronger sense of spirit is more than just a single faith, and who we are at the deeper level. Pluto helps us to go into spiritually, who are we at a deeper level. So these spiritualisms and these ideas that all arose out of that time came into being. And in the culture, there was movies, which helps us to, there was a way of creating mass illusion or participating in a mass story. So those are just a couple of ideas. But when they're in this place, when they're in this position and relationship to each other, there's all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of possibilities, either to empower universal love or to bring an illusion about where the power belongs. Pause. So that idea of, are we going to use the energy of regeneration and mastery of life and transformation for a higher, greater vision, or more illusion, deception, and escapism. And these planets have been in this position for really quite a long time, but they are also moving back into that as a strong pattern. And the thing is that Neptune, in its cycle, which is 165 years, is about to move into the position it was, or in fact, it is in the position that it was in terms of American history just before the Civil War. And that too is going to shift very soon, by next year. So we have these two planetary energies that are going to shift how they are operating in this broader spectrum. Now let's go to the next planetary energy. And so this one is Uranus. And Uranus relates well to Aquarius. Earlier I said Pluto is about to move into Aquarius. The idea of empowering equality and democracy. And there's so when these, and so Uranian energy is within the individual. It has to do, one could say it's coming from our higher self, a place beyond time, but who we are as an individual, and the desire to be free in our expression, and at its higher vibration, the sense of being equal to others. Uranus as being connected to something beyond time and to these ideas. We often say that it's connected to the superconsciousness. And so new ideas come through here, come through like flashes of insight. And sudden and unexpected changes are associated with Uranus. So is the youth, because it's the youth often who come in having an experience and go, hey, I see what's wrong. I'm going to do this. So those are, again, just a few little key words. Brings about sudden and unexpected changes. It is connected broadly to social justice and equality, but it's about the individual and individual freedom. So it came along in the 1960s, and it conjoined with Pluto. So what happened? The patterns of empowerment were challenged, primarily by the youth, but with new ideas. And the sense of freedom and democracy was in the forefront. Not everybody was equal. Not everybody had the opportunity to be equally empowered. So the structures and the patterns of how power was distributed, there was disruptions to that. Uranus brings sudden unexpected changes and is revolutionary. Pluto is revolutionary. Is long-term changes. So what happened, and obviously many things happened in the 1960s, but among those were the idea of civil rights of those who were not able to fully participate, and there were challenges to many other aspects of society. And furthermore, the nature or the kind of the way that these two powerful energies expressed through a pattern, they by themselves represented a lot of things, a lot of changes. But one of the things that it represented, because it was in the sign of Virgo, was how health of the planet, health of each other, health of ourselves, how that was being conducted and who had the power to do that. And individuals were kind of going, hey, we're not treating the planet very well. We need new ideas, new ways to do this. And but one of the consequences on a governmental level, for example, was the creation of Medicare. Happened in the 1960s, and so did a whole bunch of other things. And not everything that perhaps came into being in the 1960s were positive, but the impulse was towards more equal collective empowerment, care of the earth for regeneration as opposed to exhaustion, and being able to plumb the depths of who we are as individuals, and that freedom of expression. All that came about in the 1960s. So Uranus moving, having a cycle of revolution around the sun of 84 years, has moved faster. By the way, Pluto is moving along, but we're leaving it stationary for the sake of the discussion. And really what the relationships are and how they change. Now, we're coming up to the late 1980s and early 1990s. And Uranus comes along with Neptune. And one of the things I mentioned that Uranus is connected to is new ideas and therefore technology. And the Uranus and Neptune conjunction is 172 years. It's a very potent cycle. And it brings in all kinds of new ideas and new ways. It can, but some examples might be how does an individual freely express their faith and spirituality, Uranus, Neptune. It can also be that Uranus, a technology, allows people to express their vision, their dreams, their ideas. There may be a more democratic way, Uranus, of expressing your vision, your ideas. So what were the things that were arising then? Many things, many things. We go into long discussions about each one of these cycles. But the internet was just beginning to rise at that time. And it's often said that the internet democratized the creativity that can arise from people. Individuals can go out and put out their own videos like I'm doing now. That's a Uranus-Neptune thing. And but it can also be that an individual, being insistent on their way, can create an illusion or a deception, Neptune again, and promote that in a way that influences the feeling at the deepest unconscious level. Again, remember, so we have the superconsciousness, Uranus coming in a particularly forceful way that brings sudden changes, and the collective unconscious, that source, that pool from which all the ideas arise. And it doesn't have, it can be horrible ideas or illusions not connected to reality, or they can be these highest expressions. So there's the possibility of individuality and freedom with universal love and unity. That was a promise of 93 in particular, but of that time, 1980s through the early to mid 90s. But so was the idea that we could be really deceived by an individual, or literally have technology become the force of the source, perhaps, rather than force, but the source of what we imagine, and some of it being illusory or deceptive, or even denying of people. So that Uranus moved along. And remember, it had this experience with, it had this connection, this archetypal energy with the archetypal energy of regeneration and empowerment, and the idea of individuality and equality. So now we find Uranus in this position, and it is 1/3 of the circle around from where Pluto was, from where it conjoined Pluto. So what does that say? It says that the cycle that began in the 1960s is now coming to this position. And in this relationship, what happens is that this energy, this archetypal energy, this bundle of the human experience is in a supportive and easy flowing relationship with that energy of regeneration and an empowerment of death and rebirth. And it too is in a place where next year it is going to transition into a completely different expression. So one of the big picture things to understand before I continue with that cycle is that each one of these kinds of archetypal energies in the human experience are going to transition into a completely different way of expressing and affect different areas of our life. And because they're at these end points, these end beginning points, these omega alphas, it's intense and it's uncertain. So that alone can bring us into a sense of what's next. And so back to the idea of what were these ideas in the 1960s that socially included, hey, everybody should be equally empowered, or we should be caring for the earth in a way that is regenerative and using different technologies or ways of doing that. That there should be more freedom and democracy. And right now, we have the opportunity to make a choice, because back then in the 1960s, as we well know, there was resistance. There were sudden and unexpected deaths, if you will, to try to stop the change. And so this is not automatic. It's not automatic that we're going to empower more democracy. It could be that the old patterns of empowerment, who got to have the power, can wield that power, even though it comes from all of us. How, and I'm speaking specifically of social institutions and structures, is who gets to decide that? Will it be more equal and democratic, or will it go back to a way where perhaps technology is allowing the concentration of power over here? The other piece is that Uranus conjoined with Neptune to bring forth new ideas out of our collective unconscious, which includes unity and universal love and universal compassion, but it also includes any other number of dreams and visions. Well, it too has moved into this position that we call a sextile, and this means that there are opportunities. There are opportunities here to use the technology for more deception, or opportunities for the individual to stand up for a higher vision. So all of these things are happening all at once. Things are shifting and changing. We are being given opportunities to either use our individuality to empower a vision or to empower a higher vision. And that the individual having more power to be who we are and to express our freedom. We're going to empower freedom or not. All of that is converging. And what is at the midpoint of this? We'll step back, and I don't know if we can broaden it out, but let's look at here at the midpoint between these at this moment. And it really is kind of a moment, because the next few weeks is when there is a really strong moment to be able to bring our energy of what is being broken down into alignment with our higher vision.
Say that again.
These next few weeks is a moment when the things that are being broken down, that are no longer serving us, or where there is the other that are no longer serving us, can be applied to a higher vision. One of the things I didn't mention about Pluto is that one of the things that the way it works is it reveals where the weaknesses are. It brings the shadow up. It brings it up from the depths. The things that are hidden, that are not working, or actually causing systems to decay, and it brings it up to the surface. And so Pluto, that's part of its job, and what it has revealed in the last 15 years is where the weaknesses are in our institutions. And then in particular, in the last 4 years especially, because I'm going to go and say one more, but this one is big. This one is huge. This is a moment. Pluto, once it transitions, won't come back to that place for another 248 years. And these have their own cycles. So these energies are working together, but we have to choose. They're working with ease for opportunities to construct something strong. I was going to, I have another example I'm going to use, but let's go over here with this last energy. And that is Saturn. So again, oversimplifying somewhat because it's complicated, but Saturn has to do on one level with the reality that exists, literally the structures, the things that are created and solid, but it also relates to the institutions that hold certain hierarchies and functions in place. In the individual, Saturn represents that that energy that allows us to author our own life. The Saturn process over its 30-year cycle, its 29.5-year cycle, is about building our own inner authority and strength so that we can express who we are. And it sometimes does that by the limitations that we come up against. And those things that are strong can build a strong foundation and structure for the life. So that's what it is in individual. It's about having authority and having a structure to the life so that you can be in relationship to the outer world, particularly on a social level. And in the society, it is those structures within society, or those patterns or hierarchies, the way that they work together. Not all, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're all hierarchies. They tend to be now. But you can have matrices that are more mutually brilliant and elegant than just a hierarchy. But we've tended to, as human beings, choose hierarchies. And those who have, and so we give authority to other people, and they administer those hierarchies. But what if, this is a possibility, what if there was a matrix where there was more equal exchange and it supported something even more brilliant and amazing, and we didn't need somebody else telling us how it should run, but we're operating out of our own authority? That's a dream, that's a vision. But nevertheless, we have, for millennia, we've had these patterns, these structures, these institutions, these ways of governing the ways of doing business that had mostly hierarchies. When it comes along and it conjoins Pluto, which it does do every 40 years or so, then what happens? Well, the systems of our reality are influenced by Pluto to break down areas where there is weakness in the strength of the reality that we've created. And conversely, the collective power represented by Pluto might influence how the structure and these patterns and matrices exist and work. Now, as I said, that is a shorter cycle, and you can go back and look at several. I did a series of workshops in 2020 to explain this in detail, because in 2020, we can all remember what happened. It was big. It was a big one for a variety of reasons I don't need to go into right now. But a whole lot of what we were depending on to support our systems were broken down. And part of it was death and how authority responded to it. That was one aspect. But what also came to the fore was that, because there's no guarantee of what will happen. So those who already had authority may have tried to concentrate more power. And that happened. Corporations consolidated power, for example. And individuals wanted to maintain their authority and power. But these things were broken down, so that is resonant with the idea for the last 15 or 20 years. Pluto was moving through the sign of Capricorn, so those systems and structures that are enduring, can maintain our ability to operate in the world, were already broken down, and Saturn came along in 2020 and accelerated it. Remember, Pluto brings up the shadow. So the shadow above the existing structures was brought up. The shadow of how authority was being done was brought up. And we're still dealing with that in a big way. And what happened now, Saturn has moved along, and it comes to this place, and now its relationship to the beginning where it started with Pluto is that it's in extreme tension. So what took place in extreme, maybe overstating it, but not by much, because it tends to be a tension that isn't all entirely obvious, and is definitely a choice point. But what started to break down and be revealed in 2020, we are now having to confront at a choice point. Are we going to choose the old pattern of empowerment of who is in authority and had power? Or are we going to choose a different kind of construction, some new ideas where perhaps individuals have more authority of how they're going to master and empower their own life? Again, these are just some ideas, but this is also an inflection point. So now you have, on these big scales, all of these cycles and patterns, things that are about to change. And what's going to happen next year, not only does Neptune move into a new sign, into Aries, the sign it was in during the American Civil War, but Saturn is going to move along, and it's going to conjoin Neptune. So now our reality could be dissolved, or it could become utterly illusory. It could become a complete deception. Or we could bring structure to the ideas of our universality, that universal love and compassion are how we want to build our society and our reality. And so that's one of the reasons it's intense, folks, because this is what's going on inside of us as individuals, because it's going on out here in the collective. And we have a choice about how we're going to, what are we going to choose for ways for this to evolve. And so all of these particular energies are important, but because of the pattern I showed you before, what we call the trine, this stable, supportive energy between Uranus, freedom, and Pluto, power, and this central point. Are we going to be deceived into an old pattern, or are we going to envision a new one? And so something that is key is that we may not know, because it all feels uncertain, and it all feels so anxiety producing, because what we've relied on as a reality, kind of structure and a patterns that make sense to allow us to conduct our life, is going through these profound changes. So what is the key in all of these? Neptune is in the midpoint here. Neptune is the one that is, it's not the sole key, but I want to emphasize it. Because if you don't know, then if you can align yourself and choose universal love and compassion, what all of the masters of humanity have taught us forever, from whichever branch of understanding of our greater meaning have taught us. Love and compassion. And one of the things that we can examine love with, beyond some idea of a particular faith or pathway, is that we know that what we feel as love in the human experience is a connection to a universal pattern or energy around which the universe is organized. There's detail about how an understanding of how that works that is actually pretty rigorous, but for the sake of this discussion, when we're activated that way, then these different levels, these different dimensions come into a kind of harmony with each other, a positive, constructive harmony that allows for individual expression, and there's a coherence across
time and space.
Time and space and all existence. That is when we can hold our connection to the entire cosmos, and then therefore can find our own place within it with strength. So if you're confused right now about what's going to happen, come here. If you don't know what this higher vision is to hold, just find universal love, compassion within yourself, in your heart. So I'm going to talk more about this in the next video, because there are the ways that these long, broad cycles have been interfaced with the energies that are unfolding now. So until then, Mitakios.